just ask a couple of ones to get things steamed up a bit. So Pep, you just finished now to talk about the opportunity of corporations taking on the venture route to be able to innovate, and coming from a larger corporation, I guess that is a huge opportunity. But I also think when you're thinking about sustainability and as we're trying to forge sometimes new cultures, quite agile, quite quick, into legacy corporations. Is there any sort of advice or any secret ingredient you could talk about on how you can create that? I know it's a tricky question, but it's still it is still probably one of the biggest dilemmas.
Hi. So yeah, exactly. So essentially that's one of the reasons why it makes sense to have teams outside of the large corporation, because that's especially at the beginning when you're validating, when you have to fail, go fast, sometimes push the envelope and run at the edge of what is possible, legal even sometimes. That cannot be done inside the structure of a large company, precisely because of the innovation dilemma. So it makes sense that those things happen outside. The question is, how do we merge these interesting teams when they are working and operating in this very special environment? What was we mentioned before with Tesla and stuff, no? This reality distortion environment where people work in a very interesting way. If you merge these teams into large companies, into large structures, it's hard, and often you kill the magic. So there's no easy recipe for that. The answer would be that what we've been seeing is that often the relationship has to be almost commercial. So to have the startup developing new markets, to do the new venture or whoever is just developing, growing, and then potentially selling products from the mother company, opening markets, or just almost like a commercial relationship, more than being sitting next to it constantly. Now to have some sort of distance that allows for this dual speed operation.
So almost a transactional framework there to work out between
more than a pure
cultures.
M&A acquisition and then finding redundancies and all that stuff, is more letting them operate at their own speed. But this is case by case. It's really hard actually. That part of merging it back. I think that what is interesting is to leverage the energy of the corporation to make them grow fast, and that's where the magic I think happens in there. I don't know if I properly answered, but...
No, you did. Thank you. So another question over to Nikki. So, you guys at Accenture, you have, a great number of visibility over cases of disruption worldwide. And I was just wondering, where do you see the greatest evidence of potential business impact of this disruption? Is it something that you're seeing more alongside downstreams in the organization and the consumer experience, closer to the sales side of things, or a little bit more upstreams in product development, or how you brand a product or so on? Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, good question. I'd say there are two big observations. One is the higher value brand piece. A lot of companies really need to get that right, because if you don't have your brand essence, your brand strategic platform, raison d'etre, a lot of companies refer to it, in different ways. But if you don't know why you exist as a brand, I think it makes everything else very difficult, because then it's like, what are you activating? So we're working with a lot of companies just to get that right. And what might have been right 10 years ago isn't right for today's world, because of the growth of citizen brands, because of the growth of authenticity, because consumers will not settle for anything less than, authentic. Within that, there's also a movement of obviously brands as a service, brands can no longer just exist as products, and they have to exist and they have to play a bigger role within a consumer's lives. And that's also it's very evident in terms of brands becoming more lifestyle oriented. So, even products are making that pivot to actually articulate the lifestyle that they allow a customer to live. So I think that whole big brand piece is quite significant because it is the starting point. And that is there's a lot of data involved, there's a lot of analytics, there's a lot of stuff that you can bring to that meeting to actually then land on a place that is differentiated and sustainable for your organization, and to make sure that if you're a portfolio company, you've got brands that obviously can live and breathe in their discrete space without cannibalizing each other. And I think the other observation that we have is kind of at the other end, which is on the activation side and conversion side, because we're still seeing that a lot of companies haven't quite got the balance right between people and platforms, or man and machine. And there are still, dare I say it, a lot of people doing jobs that computers can do and can do better. So a lot of companies are struggling to work out, where do I need humans and all that brings in terms of creativity, innovation, dexterity, perception, all the wonderful things that thankfully humans bring to the party. And then how can you really benefit from the machinery in terms of speed, agility, accuracy, precision, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is the brand piece and then the model piece of man and machine are the two areas that need focus, because they will basically give you the most positive, significant impact in terms of sales performance.
Okay, thank you for that. So, starting, of course, with the brand, and then ensuring, you look at this interaction. You were talking about man and machine at the end. So, does anyone have? We're pretty running out of time, but I'm sure we have time for one question. Anyone from the floor?
It's really amazing how many times, and it makes a lot of sense. Everybody on the board agrees we must do it outside. Yes, it will be deadly inside. Executive team agrees. And then when it comes time to do it, there is so much resistance to letting it go outside that they try to do it inside, and almost every time fails. I have my own theories, but I'd love to hear sort of what's your theory? Why is it that they don't let these things outside, even though they acknowledge it? And then what's the antidote here? How do you change the mind of the board and the execs to really do it versus just talk about it?
Yeah, exactly. Often, I agree. That's the temptation, and often is because is this risk, this balance that I was mentioning before, that it took us years to perfect. Often it's the risk of what happens with the IP, what happens with the team, how do we reward this team that it makes sense for them to do it, but it's not really so, that it cannot end up at the hands of the competition. All these risks are there, and that's why it might be scary. But there are ways of making it work. What we've seen in some boards as well is that recently discussing that there are thoughts. Some boards is deciding, for example, 200 million have to come from new ventures by 2020, for example. No? Totally fresh new ventures, 200 million. That trickles down, but that has to come from the top. And that's a very strong commitment. So we have resources, we're going to put resources, and this is the objective. And then is when these things can happen. Sometimes if there's not enough, essentially if there's no budget, there's no commitment, and there's no actual decision to be made. No? So it has to be a specific objective to accomplish, budget to follow in, and a very strong commitment and vision from the top, that's for sure. But I totally sympathize with what you're saying, that often is a conversation that happens in the board, and very rarely ends up having. But having said that, I think the mindset is changing fast. That we were encountering these kind of situations maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and the last couple of years we've started working with incredible companies. With Visa is super committed to do this kind of things. Even fast mover consumer goods now starting to look at this kind of doing that stuff at scale, which I find really exciting, and it's happening. So, and often as well is the team. You need someone. Sometimes no one internally is very risky for a personal kind of career move to say, you know what, I'm going to go outside and risk it all, and it might fail because that's the nature of starting something. So often is getting an entrepreneur from outside.
I guess our time is up. Thank you, Pep. Thank you, Nikki.